Something extraordinary happened over 2,000 years ago that changed history forever. What turned fearful disciples into bold preachers? How can we explain an empty tomb, appearances witnessed by hundreds, and a movement that endured persecution from the most powerful empire of its time? The evidence for Jesus' resurrection is undeniable and goes beyond mere faith. It is recorded in historical accounts, in the testimonies of early Christians, and in the profound impact this event had on the world. Are you ready to discover the evidence that has challenged skeptics and transformed lives? The first major sign of Jesus' resurrection was the empty tomb. Early Sunday morning, a group of women went to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body, but found the stone rolled away and the tomb empty. Luke 24 verses 1-3. This shocked everyone because the Jewish leaders had sealed the tomb and stationed Roman guards to prevent any deception. Matthew 27 verses 62-66. If the disciples had stolen the body, as the Pharisees claimed, how could they have overpowered trained soldiers? Additionally, the testimony of women carries significant historical weight. In Jewish culture at that time, women were not considered reliable witnesses in court. If the gospel accounts were fabricated, they would never have placed women as the first to witness the empty tomb. This detail demonstrates authenticity. No one inventing a story would rely on a testimony that could easily be dismissed. Instead of favoring the disciples, this account reinforces the truth of the events. Another powerful detail is the impact this discovery had on Jesus' followers. They were terrified, locked inside their homes, disillusioned by their master's death. However, upon hearing about the empty tomb, they ran to see for themselves. Peter and John confirmed the women's account. The linen cloths were there, but the body was gone. John 20 verses 3-8. Something extraordinary had happened. And if the tomb was truly empty, why didn't the religious leaders present Jesus' body to disprove the disciples? That would have silenced the Christian movement before it even began. But without a body to display, the only logical explanation was the resurrection. Have you ever considered how this evidence altered the course of human history? Testimonies. After his resurrection, Jesus did not remain hidden. He appeared to many people, confirming he was alive. Mary Magdalene was the first to see him, John 20 verses 14-16, followed by other women, the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and even Peter himself, Luke 24 verses 13-34. Later, he appeared to the 12 apostles, and even to a crowd of over 500 people at once, 1 Corinthians 15 verse 6. So many witnesses could not have been hallucinating at the same time. These appearances were documented by people who risked their lives to tell the truth. If it had been a collective delusion, how can we explain the variety of these encounters? Some took place outdoors, others indoors, some with only a few individuals, others with large groups. Jesus spoke with them, ate with them, and even allowed them to touch him, as he did with Thomas, John 20 verses 27-28. The skeptical disciple refused to believe the others, but when he saw the nail marks, he fell to his knees and exclaimed, "My Lord and my God." This proves it wasn't a mere vision. It was something real and tangible. Another crucial point is that the disciples were fearful, hiding, and doubting. They were not expecting a risen Christ. Their initial reactions were shock and disbelief. If this were a myth they had created, why would they portray themselves as skeptical and confused at first? The impact of these appearances was so profound that it transformed previously timid men into fearless preachers, willing to die for the truth that Jesus was alive. If the resurrection were a hoax, why would those who saw Jesus firsthand be willing to die for this belief? No one willingly gives their life for something they know is a lie. The disciples' courage in proclaiming the resurrection, even in the face of persecution, proves that this was no fabricated tale, but an undeniable reality. And you, if you had been in their place, would you have believed without seeing? Or would you have need before the resurrection? The disciples were terrified. Peter, who had sworn to follow Jesus to the death, denied even knowing him 3 times out of fear. Matthew 26 verses 69 to 75. The others fled when Jesus was arrested, hiding in fear of the religious leaders. But something happened that completely changed these insecure men. After encountering the risen Christ, they became bold preachers, willing to endure imprisonment, torture, and even death for this truth. What could explain such a radical transformation, if not the certainty that Jesus was alive? If the resurrection had been a fabrication, the disciples would have given up at the first sign of persecution. Yet, instead of retreating, they endured beatings, stonings, and imprisonment without renouncing their faith. Peter, who once trembled before a simple servant girl, later stood before the Sanhedrin and declared, "We must obey God rather than men." Acts 5 verse 29. James was executed by Herod, Acts 12 verse 2, and all the apostles, except John, were martyred. Would anyone willingly die for something they knew was a lie? Furthermore, Jesus' resurrection not only strengthened his disciples, but also converted his enemies. Paul, who had fiercely persecuted Christians, had a direct encounter with the risen Christ and underwent a radical transformation. Acts 9 verses 1 to 6. James, Jesus' own brother, who had once been skeptical, became a leader of the church in Jerusalem after witnessing the resurrected Lord. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 7. These changes were so profound that they influenced the entire course of Christian history. Had Jesus not risen, Christianity would never have spread. A dead Messiah inspires no one, but a Savior who conquered death turned cowards into heroes of faith. This proves that the resurrection was not merely a rumor, but a real and powerful event. Can you imagine standing in the disciples' place and witnessing the impossible unfold before your very eyes? If the resurrection were a hoax, how do we explain the explosive growth of Christianity? Within a few decades, Jesus' message had spread throughout Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Acts 1 verse 8. The first Christians faced brutal persecution, but instead of giving up, they became even bolder. The Roman Empire itself tried to suppress the faith, yet within 3 centuries, Christianity became the official religion of Rome. Something powerful fueled this movement, and that something was the unwavering certainty of the resurrection. It's worth noting that all religions can survive without their founder. The only faith that would collapse without its risen leader is Christianity. In other words, Christianity without the resurrected Christ is not Christianity at all. The very essence of the Christian faith is that Jesus is alive. No religion built on a lie could endure for so long, especially under relentless persecution. If the disciples had fabricated the resurrection, Jewish and Roman authorities could have simply presented Jesus' body to silence their preaching. But they had no body to show, only an empty tomb and a group of followers willing to die for the risen Christ. How do we explain such conviction without a real, transformative experience? Another astonishing factor was the shift in Jewish traditions among early Christians. They abandoned centuries-old customs, such as Sabbath observance and temple sacrifices, and began gathering on the first day of the week, Sunday, to celebrate the resurrection. Acts 20 verse 7. Such a drastic change would have been unthinkable without an extraordinary event to justify it. The resurrection was the turning point that gave birth to a new faith. Today, more than 2,000 years later, billions still follow Jesus, and it all began with a small group of men and women who witnessed his triumph over death. If the resurrection were a myth, it would have been debunked long ago. Yet, the truth remains, challenging every generation to believe in the living Christ. Have you ever considered how this event has not only shaped history, but also impacted your own life? Beyond biblical accounts, there is historical evidence for Jesus' resurrection. Writers from that time, such as Flavius Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian, mention Jesus and his followers, recording that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and that his disciples claimed to have seen him alive after his death. The Roman historian Tacitus also confirms Jesus' execution and the rapid growth of Christianity, emphasizing how the movement persisted despite intense persecution. If the resurrection were merely a rumor, how could it have been documented by external non-biblical sources? Another crucial point is the testimony of the early Christians. Many were martyred because they refused to deny the resurrection. Ignatius of Antioch, who lived at the end of the 1st century, wrote letters confirming that the apostles had seen the risen Jesus. In the 2nd century, Justin Martyr defended the Christian faith before Roman emperors, stating that the resurrection was a historical fact. These men did not base their faith on myths, but on concrete events that transformed their lives. If the resurrection were a myth, Christianity's opponents could have easily debunked it. Instead, Jewish and Roman leaders tried to silence Christians through violence, but never managed to present a definitive argument against the resurrection. The church continued to grow because the truth could not be suppressed. The impact of this event was so profound that it even changed how we measure time. Our history is divided into before and after Christ. With so much evidence, Jesus' resurrection is not merely an article of faith, but an event with solid foundations. The real question is, what will you do with this information? Just as the early Christians had to make a choice, each of us must decide, will we believe in the resurrection and its meaning, or will we ignore one of the greatest events in human history? What will your response be? The resurrection of Jesus is not just a belief. It is a fact that has transformed lives and shaped history. The empty tomb, his appearances, the disciples' boldness, the spread of Christianity, and historical records provide undeniable evidence. If Christ conquered death, then his promises are true, and there is hope for all of us. Now, the real question is, how does this truth impact your life? Do you believe that Jesus truly rose from the dead? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And if you want to continue this journey of discovery, check out the next video on your screen. Christ is alive, and that changes everything.